The red light flickers on, the headphones crackle, and somewhere between fear and fascination, the truth starts crawling out of the dark. Hello, I'm Matthew, host of Truth from the Booth, and today we step beyond the veil with Nick Mulae, a paranormal investigator chasing the questions most people are too afraid to ask. What was it in Nick's childhood experiences that first opened the door to the unknown? How does Nick prepare to face the spirit of a killer like H.H. Holmes? And shocking investigative stories that are both dangerous physically and psychologically. We dig into exorcisms, haunted rules of engagement, tornado warnings, the rise of AI horror effects versus old school blood and guts cinema, and why a simple Pearl Jam post during Autism Awareness Month in April carried a deeper meaning. From paracon travel to whether spirits can summon other spirits, this one goes deep into the shadows. Lock the bedroom door, or maybe remove it completely. My 60-minute conversation with Nick Mulae is uninterrupted after station identification next on Folked Up Radio. Truth from the Booth, Sundays at 10 and 6 on 99.9 FM Perth Andover and streaming worldwide at folkedupradio.com. Proudly the number one folk station in Canada. Nick has been a guest on Truth from the Booth multiple times. He has been a guest on my live stream In the Moment, and he is back. Just a fantastic person to talk to, paranormal investigator, writer, director, south of the border in the great state of Illinois. We did have an opportunity to meet. I believe it was in 2019, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's gone by that quick.
Yeah, 7 years. Wow, that's crazy. Okay. You're such a fun guest to have on this show. So for the individuals who might be thinking about, going on paranormal investigations with maybe seasoned individuals, Nick's going to tell you some stories. He's, like I said, and I guess the point of this is go to my YouTube channel and hear those stories, see Nick in person. So let's start off from the very beginning. So paranormal investigator, writer, director, I want to focus more at the beginning of this, your role as a paranormal investigator. So what was it in your childhood that you found intriguing? Was there a specific event that just piqued your curiosity? And here we are all these years later, paranormal investigator. Can you walk us through that? What happened, Nick?
Yeah, be glad to. So from what I can recall is that, for starters, I started watching, like, for example, horror movies at a young age, and I think that really kind of was the kind of early start, if you will, to the to me into the paranormal, particularly because I was fortunate enough to have parents that got to allow me to watch this back in the 90s, but I was also, watching the X-Files when, it was still brand new at the time.
How old are you talking in the 90s where you first watching these movies?
I would have to say, because my earliest memory that I can recall was, I would have to say it was back in 1997, because there was one episode that I still remember, even after all these years, almost 30 years later, that really, really scared the hell out of me. And so at that time, I must have been, let me think, I probably would have only been about 4, maybe.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I was really young watching it, so I guess you can kind of say I was a bit ahead of my time.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I was thinking like maybe 7 or 8. 4. That's amazing. Okay, go on.
Yeah. So, but I think what really kind of got me interested in it, like to get involved, was again, not necessarily an experience, but it was mainly a lot of the television, other like actual reality television shows that were running at that time, which, I wouldn't necessarily say they too were brand new, because, there have been paranormal shows have been running since at least the late 60s or early 70s. It was only around this time in the late 90s, early 2000s was when it really started reaching its peak, and more of these shows started coming on to different television channels. In fact, actually, there was, just to throw this out to you in case you want to check it out, I've never seen it, but I believe it's on YouTube. One of those shows was actually a show from Canada that came out in the early 2000s that was called Creepy Canada. So when I saw these particular documentaries and shows, it immediately got my attention. I just thought to myself, that would be really interesting for something if I could get involved with, because even at a very young age, I didn't even believe in any of this stuff. I mean, I was actually somewhat even of an atheist, if you will. I just didn't believe in any of this stuff. Just wanted to find a logical explanation or anything. But this just turned everything around for me. And it wasn't long before I started, of course, I know back then social media was not like what it is now. So I kind of had to rely on a lot of the television shows. But then next thing you know, 2 years, because I started around the age of 12, the next thing you know, 2 years later, I start a paranormal club at my high school, which it's still running to this day. In fact, next year, 2027, will be its 20th anniversary because I started back in 2007.
That is amazing, and, Nick. That is, wow. That's cool. I'm learning something new. I've talked to you so many times, and I'm learning something new. Awesome.
Yeah, and so it's amazing to me how because when I first, I'm just going to say this, when I first started this club back in 2007, obviously not many people, like both kids and teachers alike, not many people took it seriously. I mean, yes, I think a lot of people thought it was just something that we were doing for Halloween because, truth be told, yes, I started around October. It was around Halloween that I started. So I think a lot of people thought it was just a temporary thing, but they didn't realize that it was actually the start of something permanent. And, here we are almost 20 years later and people are still talking about it. There's even an online article that has been written about it, and I'm actually mentioned in it. And to my surprise, I guess you can say even after all these years since I graduated high school, they're still keeping an eye out for me because they mentioned something. Nick has gone on to be this, this paranormal investigator on several different podcasts and shows and have been on numerous investigations. So after all these years, they've been watching me and they still are.
Well, that's amazing. And that's just, and they should be, I want to talk about, I want to go back to the TV shows. When you were watching the X-Files and the other programs and the documentaries, did you, in that moment at that time, believe that those shows were fiction or they were based on fact?
So when I first started watching these, I didn't really believe in most of it because at the very start, before I actually really got interested in it, to me, they were just our shows that we would watch around Halloween because, again, these were shows that broadcasted around the Halloween season and whatnot. Particularly one of my favorites, which I actually still watch to this day because this was kind of the early roots of me getting involved with it, was a show that was called Scariest Places on Earth that was hosted by Linda Blair, who I think a lot of us remember her from The Exorcist,
yes,
and narrated by Zelda Rubinstein, who was the psychic in the Poltergeist movies.
Oh wow!
So, it was. I mean, yes. Now I kind of understand that some of the stuff may have been faked, but then again, they probably were also recreating things that they were unable to record at the time. But that was kind of my exposure. But as I started watching more of these shows and was climbing through the ranks, if you will, I started thinking to myself, maybe there is something truly out there, because when you have different individuals on these shows, and not just the paranormal investigators themselves, just people who've lived in these haunted houses or own haunted locations or whatnot, you just see basically people from all different walks of life. And no two stories or accounts are really the same. They're all different. Might have some similarity to each other, but they all have something different to it. And when you have so many people, especially from around the world, telling these stories and knowing that this is not acting. Like, they're actually telling you a real story here that they really encountered. Because, like, I've seen numerous documentaries too where sometimes the experience is so upsetting that these people get emotional over it. So that basically tells you that this is not something that they're making up. So I really I went from being a skeptic to a point where, yes, I was still a skeptic, but now I believed anything was possible, to eventual believer. But the final piece of the puzzle that really won me, because it's like getting all this information and, hearing all these stories was great, and it did help me start believing into this stuff. But in order for me to become a full believer, I had to have my own real experience to become like this 100%. Now, yes, but at around that same age, around the age of 14, I did have a few part-time investigations that I did. And yeah, there were times that, I often heard, sounds, maybe some voices or crying or screaming or whispers. That was a good start. But I wanted to see like an actual full body apparition to really prove that this stuff actually exists. And a few years later, by the age of 17, I had the opportunity to investigate a notorious haunted location down in Louisville, Kentucky. That's known as Waverly Hill Sanatorium, which, yes, it was a tuberculosis sanatorium. In fact, just to throw a good word out for that place, this year, as a matter of fact, is Waverly Hill Sanatorium's 100th birthday. It was built in 1926, and here we are now again in 2026, and it's still standing. So it's great. Yeah, this was a building that was designed to originally be torn down several years ago. Thank God we saved it. We're hoping it still stands for another 100 years. But no, nonetheless, it is definitely regarded not only just for its history, but probably one of the most famous haunted locations in the country, if not the world, because people are drawn to this location from all over the world. And especially for me, at only 17 years old at the time, it was definitely an honor to go, because again, it was also my first full night investigation. And I guess you can kind of say the stage was set for me for that night, because I had a lot of incredible experiences there. That place, without a shadow of a doubt, does not disappoint.
Okay, you have painted a fantastic picture from the age of 4 right up to 17, and experienced more paranormal stuff than most people would in a lifetime. So
yes,
I can hear the excitement in your voice, starting up this program, getting ready to celebrate 20 years. In the moment, you are a part of a few podcasts, and I want to talk specifically, give you the chance to talk specifically, give a shout out to everyone that is a part of the Fear Fans podcast. And I'm curious, what is the content? How do you attract new guests, and where is this show reaching to? Like, where do you know countries that you're having this conversation with people?
So with the show Fear Fans, it's not necessarily paranormal, but we do have some in between, depending on, because it's more of a movie show. So it depends also on what movie it is. So sometimes it's paranormal, sometimes it isn't. And it's particularly involving different horror movies that we talk about. The actual host of the show, who actually runs it, is my very good friend Don Elmy, who I've known for 20 years. He and I have gone back, as far as 2005. Funny enough, first time I actually met him was on a ghost tour here in Chicago. So, but as far as countries that have reached out, we've reached out to quite a few of them. From what I can recall is, yes, I mean, in addition to people from different viewers from the United States, there's been a few viewers also from Canada who have watched. We've also had viewers some from the UK, some from Australia, one from Japan. We've also had one or two from Indonesia, the Philippines, India, I believe. I think we even had someone from Mexico, I believe. Oh, and actually, I just remember South Africa. So we've had Ireland. That was another one that just popped up in my head. So we've had quite a share other countries. But even if we're not live anymore, even those who watch the show later, there have been a few other occasions where some other countries, particularly from Europe, tune in because obviously, understandably, they're 6, 7 hours ahead of us. So there have been a few occasions where some shows we've also had some viewings after the show was over from, I would say, like the Netherlands, from Belgium, I think from Sweden and Denmark too. So yeah, it's actually just one more to add, even New Zealand. So we've had quite the international viewings.
Okay, the reach is far. You mentioned the movie The Exorcist with Linda Blair here a few moments ago. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, I've been out on an investigation. We actually went to Peggy's Cove here a few years ago. Great experience. But I want to ratchet it up a notch and talk about exorcisms. And I'm wondering, Nick Mulae, what conditions would need to be met for you to witness a live exorcism? And who would you be sharing that moment with?
Well, for starters, just sharing that moment, it would have to be with other investigators, like who actually know what they're doing, but also more importantly, too, is, of course, having a priest or an actual exorcist, a minister, demonologist as well. But
if you were a spectator, you're a fly in the wall, and you're able to be in this room, would you be able to handle it? If you knew that your safety was 100% guaranteed, nothing was going to happen to you, would you sit in the room and watch something like that?
Well, here's the funny thing, and I'm not sure if I ever told you about this before. I actually have witnessed an exorcism myself.
Oh wow! Okay, please share.
10 years, almost 10 years ago in 2017, and this was something that was unexpected. We were not expecting this to occur, and this was at a residential location. So this was at somebody's house, and we were just, originally just going to do like a normal house investigation to find out what was going on in this house. And the family that was there, they were giving us all these different accounts of what was happening, which we came to the conclusion because we did a ghost box session and we realized that there was not one, but there were multiple different entities that were in this house. Now, it is true the house was of historic significance. It was built in 1908. But unfortunately, I didn't get a lot of history behind the house other than the year when it was built. So as far as any type of tragedy or events that occurred to this day, I still don't really know. But we only went to that house twice. The first time, like I said, was because I will say this: when you're doing a residential investigation too, if you've heard of Ed and Lorraine Warren, those who inspired the Conjuring movies. Ed Warren once said, because sadly both of them had passed away, after all these years. Ed Warren once said in an interview that when we go out to people's homes and they ask us for help, we're very much like the police, because much like when people have to call the police if there's like some domestic issue or something like that. I've actually said that if you have some domestic abuse, like issue going on at home with someone living, you call the police. But if you're dealing with a domestic issue that was something otherworldly, you call people like, or if the police don't know what to do, you call people like us. So that's kind of like with how things, occurred with this. But I think it went a little bit too far because, yes, the first day we were there, it was just only questioning the family members to get a full detail of what was going on in their house. And we ended up going back a few days later, and we were only going to be there just to do a house cleansing because, to be clear on things, none of us were trained to be or were actual qualified exorcists or authorized exorcists. Plus, you also need to get full permission from the church, from the Catholic Church, to approve of something like that, which that's not an easy process to go through. Because before I go into the actual account of what happens, this is one of the things that you always have to be aware when it comes to supposedly people who are possessed, or when it comes to exorcisms. As a matter of fact, if you look at a movie like The Exorcist, if you remember, there's a scene in the movie where the mother approached one of the priests and asked for an exorcism, like if it's possible. And the priest, was kind of skeptical in the very beginning, because he said, well, the first thing that someone would have to do is they would have to build a time machine and go back to the 15th century, because to be clear on things, because unfortunately there are some people out there, especially with some of the modern day shows that try to say that, there's demons all over the place and that they're here to possess you and stuff like that. It's not as common as everybody thinks it is. It's literally it's an extremely rare phenomenon. But for those who, claim that they're demonically possessed, unfortunately, now that we've kind of gotten a better understanding of, when it comes to possessions, there's also the sign of mental health, because, people might be there. We now know of certain things like, split multiple personality disorder or schizophrenia, or, or some type of mental disease or something. You really have to pay attention to make sure that these people are actually suffering a demonic possession and not just, suffering from a mental illness. But with what I witnessed in this case was probably something that was kind of a one in a million, and also probably something I will never experience again. It was probably like literally a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like, I'll put it this way too. To be clear, like, if somebody was levitating in the air, then I would say, yeah, that's definitely not a mental illness or issue they're having. That would definitely be somebody possessed, then, no doubt about it. But the things that I witnessed in this was that, because like I said, what was originally intended to be just a house cleansing, we realized that while there were multiple entities in this house, I think we came to the conclusion that, yes, there were several of them. Probably most, some of them were benign, but others were more sinister. But in addition, sometimes you just have that one really nasty entity that's like the worst out of all of them, and it's so hateful, so negative. It's still not proven to say if it was an actual demon, but it's still something that's just not to be taken lightly. So this unexpected exorcism, which, like I said, to be clear, I did not take part in. I just happened to witness the entire, situation where the eyes actually rolled up, and then they came back with like a blackish tint to them. And again, because even then I still had my skepticism side, just making sure that no one was suffering like any type of mental illness. When you see those eyes change to this blackish tint, that rules it out immediately. But when you see something like that occurring to you, it changes, what you believe in forever. No doubt about it. And in addition to that, the voice began to change, which sounded, a lot more deeper, which I knew for this kid. It was like a 20-year-old kid that, I knew at this point it was no longer him anymore. And as far as the actual, like how long it lasted for, it felt like an eternity, but I think the entire experience only lasted for maybe about 5 or 6 minutes, as I recall. But it did feel like a long time. But I will admit, during that entire sequence, this was one of the few times where I basically am admitting that I was scared. I was actually scared of what was happening.
I'm glad that you said that, because this is what I want to talk about. When does it become too dangerous for the investigators? Like, it's a physically survivable event, but the psychological damage, like, when do you need to pull the pin and vacate?
To be perfectly honest, I would have stopped it immediately when this happened, because I'd be like, we got to stop, guys, because again, first of all, we're not authorized to do this. Like, the thing that you want to, the thing that you need to do when you're going to these residential locations, especially if you really are dealing with something truly evil or demonic, is that you don't want to perform. I mean, yes, while there are some investigators and demonologists who are authorized to perform an exorcism, most of us are not. And in this case, most of the investigators I was with that time were not authorized to do it. The original plan is that you definitely want to try to get as much evidence as possible. And contrary to popular belief, when we go into these locations, I mean, yes, we're trying to prove that this stuff does exist, but if we're dealing kind of like with an emergency situation, it's more than just proving it to that to everyone that this does indeed exist. Because if there's really something bad going on, we need to gather as much evidence as we possibly can, so that way we can bring in the proper authorities to come in and help take care of the problem. And that's kind of like what happened with us, was that we did not bring the proper authorities in. Because, to be clear on things, when it comes to an exorcism or something like, something similar like that, you're basically playing with fire. Because when you're going out to these, when it comes to possession and an exorcism itself, an exorcism can be very painful for the possessed individual, or worse, it can even be fatal. Like, there have been some cases where people have actually died as a result of the exorcism. So it's it's a very controversial type of situation, like, or move, if you will. And yes, while people are people were skeptical of it, like, let's say 100 years ago or so, it's still a very controversial thing to even think about, even to this day. And looking back at the exorcism that I witnessed, to be perfectly honest with you, when I said that I was scared, I was not even necessarily scared of the actual possessed entity that was, possessing this kid. I was more concerned about this kid's life, because, again, I'm not going to lie, knowing that his life was on the line, that was actually more scarier than the actual exorcism itself. Because if I realized that if he didn't survive by the end of this, not only me but the family involved, honestly, we all could have ended up going to prison for murder.
Wow, that is an incredible story. That's the first time I've heard that story, Nick. And I want to keep in the vein of possession, being possessed. I just did some quick research for this next talking point, and I want to know if this name rings a bell for you. H. Holmes. He was
yes.
So he was a serial killer, and people can do their research. But the reason I bring him up, I'm curious, is there, in your experience or having conversations with the many people that you've met over the years, the paracon, is there a difference between a murderer's spirit and the spirit of an accident victim?
So for like a murderer's spirit, I would say, obviously, like, it's everyone's choice of what they do after death, of course.
True, yes.
But for a murderer's spirit, I would say that I think a vast majority of the time, they often return, I guess you can kind of say often return to the scene of their crimes, because for them, that was where they did their most horrific, terrible work. And, because with some serial killers out there, because there's a lot of them that even still to this day have shown no remorse for their crimes. So it goes to show that if they were evil in life, very likely they're going to be evil still in death. And sometimes they like to revisit the spots because, now that some of these killers are dead, they're no longer in prison. They're basically free to roam the earth as long as they pretty much want to and as far as they want to. And I would probably say for a serial killer like H. Holmes, or another famous serial killer that we had here in Chicago, John Wayne Gacy, even though the places that they live, no longer exist, that they've both been demolished since then, it's still they still see those spots as their only reminders of the past. And this is like where they had their, I hate to say it, but like their most exciting experience, which sounds horrible. But for an accident victim, I would say that it's kind of a combination. Sometimes it's by choice, but sometimes that spirit is also trapped, because we've all heard about these so-called vanishing hitchhikers that exist. You could find dozens of vanishing hitchhiker stories from all over the world. In fact, we probably have one of the most famous vanishing hitchhiker stories, again in the world, here in Chicago, called Resurrection Mary. which is said to haunt Resurrection Cemetery. Now, I've been to the cemetery myself. I have yet to have encountered Resurrection Mary myself, but there have been stories of Resurrection Mary, because the typical story, for those who aren't familiar with the Vanishing Hitchhiker story, is usually it's involving a lone motorist driving late at night, usually either on a rainy night or just a moonless night. And as they're driving, usually by a cemetery, in this case, let's say the one that I'm talking about, Resurrection Cemetery, they'll see a young girl or a woman, like usually in her late teens or late teens, 20s, or early 30s. Usually standing by the side of the road late at night, and knowing that there's nothing around, for them to go to, usually the motorist will usually pull over and ask, is everything okay? Do you need a ride? And usually the hitchhiker accepts the ride and usually sits in the front or the back seat of the car. And in most accounts, they do, most of the time they do not talk. Or when the driver asks, who she is, or, where was she coming from, she rarely answers any questions. In the case with the Resurrection Mary, again, she might just say, just take me to the cemetery or something like that. And once they reach the intended destination, in most versions, the driver will let them know that they have arrived, only to discover that their passenger has vanished mysteriously without a trace. And, no sign of, without ever exiting the car. And in most of these typical legends, it maybe not necessarily the case with Resurrection Mary, but with other vanishing hitchhikers, when they discover the address, because in other stories, it's usually to their house. So when they find out, when they drop them off at the requested address, which is usually their home, and after they've disappeared, they often will usually go up to the house, knock on the door, and it's usually an older person who answers the door and says, that is this individual home or whatever. And she usually says, that was my daughter, but she died 10 years ago in a tragic car accident. So that's when the passenger learns that that's where the driver learns that their passenger that they were taking home was actually a ghost. This is something that's just not restricted just to the United States and Canada. This is like a phenomenon worldwide. So you can look at different countries from around the world, and they'll have their own versions of the Vanishing Hitchhiker.
I was thinking about when the many stories that you've been telling me, probably during the exorcism story, I was thinking to myself, as the hair on my arm was standing up, I was like, this is a great late Friday night conversation. I can't wait to not go to sleep tonight. Ken, this is something I try and stay away from the yes and no talking points, but this is something here. Can spirits summon other spirits?
Oh, yeah, I think they could. Usually, and there are many, many reasons why I think they could. Usually, I mean, it's for both. Usually, either for good purposes or bad purposes. Usually, it's to help out. To assist them if a particular spirit is unable to do something. Like if it's trying to help somebody, and if it's unable to do it on their own, they usually, I guess you can kind of say that it's not been proven, but the way how I see it is I think there's some kind of calling, I guess, or maybe some type of communication where they might call other spirits, especially those that maybe the spirits that they call were people that the living knew once, and knowing that this was somebody that they knew, they try to call them to assist them. But if you're looking at something, negatively, there was actually one, funny enough, this also involved an exorcism. This occurred back in 1981, where a young boy was actually, in fact, this was one of the cases that the Warrens investigated. It became known as the demon murder case. And in that situation, there was a young 12-year-old boy who was being tormented by what first appeared to be like an old man. The creepiest thing about this old man, however, though, was that he had hooves for feet. And at night, he turned into a beast, basically a demonic entity. But at first, it was just dealing with one entity, and but as time went on, things got worse, because this kid, who I believe may have had some kind of abilities, later warned his family that this particular demonic entity actually called more demons to attack him. So it was essentially, as much as I hate to say it, like a gang of demons, if you will, teaming up, because they were all after the same thing. I mean, thank God, eventually this kid was saved, but sadly, this also ended in a murder case involving one of the family members. So, but yeah, I would say that, yeah, spirits definitely can call other spirits to assist them in times of desperate need if they're unable to do something themselves.
Okay, I did not know that. And for the majority of this conversation, the word demon has been used so many times.
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, yes.
And I just find it. This is just a great conversation. You revealed so much, and when I put these talking points together, I try, because you've been on. We have spent probably hours talking back and forth about your paranormal investigating, and I always try, like I said, my research is based on your Facebook. So I appreciate your time. We're just going to step away from the paranormal investigator side of you for a moment, and just going back to watching movies. And this was on your Facebook. You watched. You're always going to the movies. You're always hanging out with your friends. Karaoke, bowling. It's just fantastic to see you out there. So you went to a screening of the 45th anniversary of Evil Dead, and a screening of Undertone, which I assume is probably fairly new, probably not 45 years old. So as someone, at the age of 4 watching these shows, and then, watching the Evil Dead, I just want you to think about the special effects, the old school special effects compared to the year 2026 and the AI and the green screen. What do you prefer and why?
I truly prefer the original, the older fashioned stuff, because when you're using a lot of the original stuff, like the actual special effects, it looks more realistic. Because when it comes to like a lot of the CGI, the AI kind of stuff, it just doesn't add into it. I mean, yes, I understand if they have to use CGI or AI or computer effects if there's just a scene that's just far too difficult to like make in real life. I understand that, but it removes a lot of the realism when you're using actual effects. In fact, one of the most recent movies to kind of go back to the old traits, if you will, which is also based on a book that you know all too well. I'm a huge fan of these books. Is the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark movie adaptation. If you watch that movie, not only is it set in the late 60s, it takes place, if you haven't seen it, takes place in 1968. And it's not only just a period movie, but if you watch that movie, and this came out in 2019, you barely see any CGI in this movie. I've always said this numerous times, but Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, to me, was what horror movies used to be. They were guys in costumes. They were under heavy makeup. It was some certain animation or special effects. There was like, out of the entire movie, as I recall, there was only like one scene out of the entire movie where CGI was used, because it was involving the classic red spot story where spiders, burst out of a boil and crawl out of a girl's face. Like, I can understand that needs to be CGI, but everything else was all special effects, old-fashioned, and I loved it, because I was like, wow, this is, for a movie from 2019, this is great. I think a lot of our old masters of horror, if you will, would be proud to see such a movie like this go back to the old-fashioned way. But like I said, with CGI, it just doesn't, or CGI or AI, it just doesn't give the same type of response. It doesn't have the same feeling.
Oh, absolutely. I'm an 80s kid, and I used to see like the behind the scenes. I think one of my most favorite behind the scenes of a movie where they had special effects, people holding this and props, was Evil Dead. Evil Dead was the first horror movie that I ever saw, and I'll never forget biking home from my friend's house. I could have been an Olympic peddler that day. My cycling skills were just off the chart. Let's move on to something else. Aside from being the paranormal investigator, would you say that you have a minimal amount of experience when it comes to storm chasing, or are you more sharing videos of people who have gone out and actually done it, or any close calls? Because I know in mid-April you were putting up tornado warnings, so I know they're in your neck of the woods. So any close calls, Nick?
We actually did. About 2-3 weeks ago, there was a huge line of storms that actually originated from the Tornado Alley states themselves, from Kansas and Oklahoma. And this, you have to remember, because they're known as supercells, intense thunderstorms with strong rotating updrafts. And although tornadoes cannot last this long, supercells themselves can last for hours. So these supercells lasted long enough to actually make its way up to the states of Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, northwestern Indiana, and southern Michigan, as well as even western Ohio. And, it was definitely it was kind of scary too, because first of all, this happened after dark. So therefore, with the storms happening after dark, it was all the more dangerous because, in the daylight, at least you could see what's going on. But at night, it's almost impossible to see them. And the only warning that you really get is the roar, that train-like roar that you get. So, and what was kind of strange about this particular night was that they said it was only, when it started getting closer to us, there was only a severe thunderstorm warning out. So that's what they initially issued. But then all of a sudden, we started hearing tornado sirens blaring. And that's when I said to my mom, both of my parents, that we better get down to the basement. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, in this case for my dad didn't really take it too seriously, which when those sirens are going off, you need to get downstairs regardless. So as you can imagine, I was a bit disappointed, but my mom and I and the cats, we managed to get downstairs. Thankfully, the entire time we still managed to have power on, so we were able to keep the weather station running to find out what was going on. And they definitely did confirm that there was a tornado that was on the ground just a few miles from where we were. Fortunately, the fickle tornado dodged our area and either moved north or dissipated. But as far as actual storm chasing, I have yet to have gone on an actual storm chase. That is something I would like to do. In fact, some of my other friends are also interested in wanting to do that. But of course, in order for us to make that happen, we would probably have to head down to the Great Plains states of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. But to be perfectly honest, as far as tornadoes that have been affecting the United States this year, because I know also Canada does get its share of tornadoes as well, but in the case with the United States, I was truly surprised of which state has been getting hit the most this year, because again, you would expect it would be like Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, or Texas. To our complete surprise, it's none of those states. It's actually our very own state, Illinois, that has been hit. Not necessarily close to the Chicago area, but throughout the entire state. I think the last time that I checked of the number of tornadoes that have affected the state of Illinois, I think the number last time was about 130 tornadoes, and the average number of tornadoes for Illinois usually was, maybe about 40 or 50, average. So, for this year, we're talking a whole lot of tornadoes to affect our state.
Wow, that's concerning. If you're just joining me, this is Truth from the Booth. My name is Matthew. We're speaking with Nick Mulae in Illinois. Just a couple more things, Nick. I'm going to let you go. Everything that we've talked about are things that Nick has already put out on his social media. So there's no gotcha moments. I'm not here to pry. But I do want to ask you about this, Nick. April was Autism Awareness Month, and you recognized the day by sharing a video from one of my favorite bands, Pearl Jam, and their song Daughter. And I'm curious why.
That song, first of all, is actually one of my favorites. And yes, I'm a big Pearl Jam fan myself. Funny enough, the song when they released "Daughter," that was actually the same year I was born. So I'm the same age as that song, 1993.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it was released a few months after I was born, so I was very fortunate enough to be born the same year that came out. But anyways, the reason why I chose that particular song was that because I actually looked into the song itself, because I remember first hearing it on the radio over a decade ago on like one of the oldies stations. And, you know, at first I didn't really take much notice. You know, like whenever you hear a song, you actually like it, but you don't really pay too much attention to what the actual lyrics mean. But I was able to get, you know, like Shazam it and get the name of the song, and then I was able to add it to my 90s playlist after, again, when I found out what year it came out. But there was just something odd about the song that just kept having me play it over and over again. And as I was, because when there's a song that I like, I mean, I think we all do this, but I often like to play it repeatedly so I could, you know, remember the lyrics.
Of course, yes, of course.
You know, whether it's for karaoke or if it's just for, if I happen to hear it on the radio, like if I'm out with friends, at least I would be able to remember. In fact, I still do with that song to this day. And so, but then I did some research about what the song was supposed to be about, and I found out that it was a pretty dark themed song, especially near the ending of it, where it just kind of has this, while a vast majority of the song, in some way, I guess you can kind of say sounds pretty positive, near the end of it, it just kind of has like this eerie ending to it. And I get it, of course. Yes, this was the early 90s. You know, this was like considered grunge music. And a lot of those songs, like, you know, with Pearl Jam or Nirvana or, some of the other bands out there kind of had that same elements. When I found out that this song was it wasn't necessary to represent something that actually happened, you know, that any of the band members knew, but it was typical for something like this to happen in real life, either back then or today, because the song is about, initially a young girl who we believe has some type of disability. You don't necessarily say if it's autism, but it does say it's involving a young girl, you know, who has some type of disability, but is constantly, I guess you can kind of say, rejected by her own mother, because, you know, it's kind of that feeling of she's not the daughter that her mom wanted. You know, the fact that she's disabled, and in spite of everything that this young girl tries to do for her mom is still not proud, because she's not the kid that she dreamed to have, which that unfortunately is still something that, you know, has been going on. You know, that's not just an isolated event. Even though the song came out in 1993, this is something that's been going on forever, like even to this day, even centuries. So when I realized, you know, got a better understanding of the song, to be perfectly honest, it echoed a lot of my own experiences that I've gone through. To be clear on things, not with my parents. You know, my parents raised me well. I just want to put that out there. They had no issue with me being, you know, having autism. Yes, I was a bit more challenging compared to the average child, but, you know, they still raised me well. But what I mean by comparison is, while my parents were very and the rest of my family were very accepting of who I was, you know, from the time I was born to now, when I grew up and I went to school, it was a very different story. So once again, you know, our understanding of people with, you know, disabilities was definitely not as understandable as it is today. But even today, I still deal with that issue with jobs. You know, this is not only just something I've had to deal with as a child, it's still something I have to deal with as an adult. And I can't tell you how many times that I have been in situations where I'm unaccepted. I've been rejected. I mean, I can think of all the words that you could think of. I've been I've been unaccepted. I've been rejected, denied, refused, not even given a chance or anything. I mean, all the words you could think of practically. But in spite of that, I still never gave up, even though there were times that I felt like it was time to, because over these last number of years, as you know all too well, I have managed to meet people, not only just other people with not only other people with autism, but even those who don't have it, who have come to accept who I am. And that includes my friends that I hang out with, as well as my paranormal community. And as you know, with my connections all over the world. So it's amazing to me that, yes, while I still bear the scars of what I've gone through, because this really all started at the age of 5 for me. And so, this is something, and like I said, even every now and then I still deal with it today, just not as severely as it was back then. Actually, the worst time I would probably say was when I was in middle school. So, but the point of what I'm basically getting is that it amazes me, even to this day, how, while I didn't think I was never going to have a good future at a very young age, it's amazing to me how I managed to somehow still manage to build something that went from nothing to something that I become a huge icon and inspiration for everybody, again, from all over the world. So it goes to show to me that in spite of what I've gone through, put it this way, I know it's only May. So what I'm about to bring up is actually something more Christmas related. I'm sure you've seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life.
Absolutely. Yes.
Which I love that movie. By the way, real quick, later this year, they're going to have a special screening of that movie too later this year around Christmas for the 80th anniversary of that movie. So I'll definitely be in attendance for that. But just like George Bailey in that movie, I've come to the conclusion of where I'm at today compared to what happened all those years ago, that I truly do have a wonderful life, and I was able to make it happen. So when I look at that, so to go back to the original topic, with the song Daughter, yes, I may have had, I can relate to the song, but I could also see it as a way to share it out for people, like, especially for people with autism as well as other disabilities who, maybe as we speak right now, who may have been going through the same thing that I went through. So that's the main reason why I wanted to share it out, for people to understand where I was coming from as an autistic person, and understand that at the end of the day, we're all human. Yes, we may have, some of us have autism or other type of disabilities, but we're all human beings at the end of the day. It shouldn't be about who or what we are.
Absolutely.
And that's why I shared the song out. I mean, and I'm sure if Pearl Jam, if the band members of Pearl Jam were listening to this right now, if there was some easy way to contact them, if they heard the reason why I put it out there, I honestly think they would probably be very proud to hear that.
Yeah, reach out to Eddie Vedder on X. I want to, Nick, I so appreciate your time. You're just a fantastic individual to have on this show. I know, the main focus of Truth from the Booth is dealing with the unhoused, but I just wanted to get into a different lane this weekend. I'm going to take next weekend off to observe the national holiday here, but I want to leave with this. It sounds like you have a pretty good support system, supportive parents, great friends, but I want to give you the opportunity to give a shout out to the cat, the furry, the furry family member, because that, let's be real. I think I know people are probably more willing to open up just a little bit more to a pet that they know is going to love them unconditionally and is not going to tell anybody.
Yeah. Oh, yes. But yeah, that was... So, to be honest, first of all, I actually have 2 cats.
Okay, 2 cats.
So,
even better.
Yeah, the cat that... So, the 2 cats, their names are... First of all, they're both females. Their names are Kitty funny enough, and the other is Slinky. Slinky is the one who often usually makes an appearance on many of the shows that I'm on, whether I'm a show host or a guest. I've often considered her almost like a mascot at this point, because it's just a traditional sense that she always makes some kind of appearance on any shows that I'm on. Then again, she probably also knows that I'm talking to somebody, so she just, in her mind, she just wants to get involved just to have her moment. But as for the other cat, Kitty, that one picture that I took, first of all, she's a cat that is a very rarely seen cat. So this is actually one that you guys don't see very often, because she does not like visitors other than, my family and I. But that was a rare moment for me to have her and I get a picture together, because it was at a time when I was going through a really sad moment. I'm not going to go, I don't want to say too much about it, but let's just say that things were not going well. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say things were not going well, but it was kind of a misunderstanding. But it was something that I felt really sad over.
Okay.
And during one moment, my how that picture came to reality was that my cat, she likes to have us follow her around in certain parts of the house, particularly the front hall. I don't know exactly what purpose, but she sat down on the ground, and I sat down with her because I think she wanted attention. And something just told me just to pick her up. And of course, I know most cats usually don't like to be picked up, but I was only briefly picking her up just to have her on my lap, which at first she wasn't really too happy about. But then I guess she changed her mind. She got herself comfortable, and she sat on my lap. And it was just such a affectionate moment that, because again, I was feeling really sad, depressed. So I took that opportunity to take a picture, because there were also some people that were asking about, because some of the other investigator friends of mine had not heard from me in several days. And this was kind of my answer to everybody about, what's been going on with me. So that's why that picture was shared. And even though I didn't necessarily give the reason why, I was feeling, because again, obviously it's personal. It's still to let everyone know that, like anybody else, we have our good days and we have our bad days. And sadly, this was one of my bad days. And as far as to how I'm actually feeling now, obviously, as you can tell, I still feel, I am a lot more positive and a lot more happy, but I still do have my moments of sadness. But a lot of this basically, of this recovery, if you will, was mainly not only just for me to try to not only necessarily take it with a grain of salt, but it was also through the help of my friends. And they were particularly two friends of mine, one of which who was on your show the last time we were on, Rochelle. I would like to, it was mainly because, she helped me through this, along with my friend Nikki. So, I honestly, and even though I already said this to him, I honestly wouldn't know where I would be if not for the two of them. So they really helped me through this. And I owe both of them basically my life for it.
That's fantastic. And when this episode airs on my YouTube channel, I will be sending them the link so they can hear that for themselves. Nick Mulae, paranormal investigator, writer, director in the great state of Illinois. Always appreciate your time. Thank you for making the hair on my arm stand up multiple times tonight. Again, great idea to have a paranormal investigative chat at 11:34 on a Friday night. Nick Mulae, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Again, it's always a pleasure being on your show. I always have a great time, and as always, like I said the last time, let me know when you like for me to come back on, and I would be more than happy to do that. So thank you once again, Matt.
And now for something completely different. For one spring run, Canada needs to put the rivalries aside and rally behind the Montreal Canadiens. Why? Because no team in hockey carries more history, pressure, and passion north of the border. 24 Stanley Cups, legends like Maurice Richard, Guy Lafleur, and Carey Price helped turn the Canadiens into more than a franchise. They became part of Canadian identity. And here's the fun part. When Montreal makes a playoff run, the entire country feels louder. Bars erupt, jerseys reappear from closets. Even people who don't watch hockey suddenly know the score. The Bell Centre becomes absolute chaos in the best possible way. Canada hasn't celebrated a Stanley Cup champion since 1993, and that champion was Montreal. So whether you're in Halifax, Winnipeg, Calgary, or a tiny town with one outdoor rink and bad coffee, this is the time to unite behind the Habs. Because when the Canadiens are rolling in the playoffs, hockey in Canada just hits a bit different. I'm Matthew. Let's get you back to a great Sunday soundtrack on 99.9 FM Perth Andover and folkedupradio.com.